The Story of the Blues by Paul Oliver. Contents. Introduction. Chapter 1. Long Hot Summer Days. The background of Afro-American music in the meeting of cultures after the Civil War. Chapter 2. Cotton Field Haulers. Origins of blues in work songs, field haulers, and the ballads of the songsters. Chapter 3. Dirt Road. Traditions of the plantations around Mississippi Delta and emergent blues technique. 4. Froggy Bottom to Buckhead. Blues singers of Texas, Alabama, and Georgia. Development of guitar and piano music. 5. Bed slats and all. String washboard and jug bands, Beale Street Blues, and medicine show entertainers. Chapter 6. Rabbit Foot and Toby Time. Minstrel and tent shows, vaudeville theater circuits, and the women classic blues singers. Chapter 7. Struttin' That Thing. Negro migrations in the jazz era. Piano music in the South, in Chicago and Detroit. Chapter 8. Walking the Bases. Urban blues and boogie woogie of St. Louis, Indianapolis, Louisville, and Midwestern cities. Chapter 9. Hard Time Everywhere. Blues and the record industry. Themes and personalities of the post-war depression. Chapter 10. Chicago Breakdown. Blues band of Chicago's South and West Sides in the 30s and 40s. Chapter 11. Back to Mississippi. The continuity of rural blues tradition in Mississippi before the Second World War. Travelin' Men. Chapter 12. Guitar rags, harmonica breakdowns in eastern states and the Carolinas and Tennessee. Chapter 13. The Number One Scab. Barrel house piano, the effects of recording, Kansas City blues, and the migration to the West Coast. Chapter 14. King Biscuit Time. Blues on the radio networks, post-war blues, centers of South and the urban North. Chapter 15. Blues and Trouble. Rhythm and blues, rise of modern styles, blues and the international audience. Music examples. Periodicals, books, and records. End of the reading of contents. The Story of the Blues by Paul Oliver. A recording for Vox Olympia. The Story of the Blues by Paul Oliver. A recording for Vox Olympia. Introduction. Roll over Beethoven. When the Beatles recorded the iconoclastic title, it wasn't only Beethoven who had to move aside for the composer of the song, the rhythm and blues singer, Chuck Berry, as well. When the Rolling Stones were confessing the blues, they were confessing too to the influence of Walter Brown and B.B. King. When the Animals acclaimed the Big Boss Man, the real boss man was Jimmy Reed. It was Lightning Hopkins who was preserved when the Lovin' Spoonful put the blues in the bottle. It was a Mississippi Negro Booker White, on parole from Parchment Farm, who was Bob Dylan's muse for Fixin' to Die Blues. Using the words and music of a Memphis gumball raker, Gus Cannon, the Rooftop Singers offered the invitation to walk right in. Popular music has been walking right in on the blues ever since. So pervasive has been the influence of the blues on pop music since the early 1960s that it is already difficult to recognize it. Once, the 12-bar, three-line structure was peculiar to the blues. Now, it is commonplace. Sliding bottlenecks on guitar strings, backbeat drumming, crossed harp harmonica, these have become the familiar sounds of the top 20s. Electric guitars and electric basses, amplified harmonicas, shouting singers playing the music of Chicago blues bands on college campuses and in British teenage clubs, with Latin American rhythms and the wailing sitars of Indian ragas, the blues has been assimilated. This book is not about the current trends in pop music, but about the blues, attempting to show the changing patterns in the evolution of a modern folk music until it moved from the circumscribed world of a segregated minority to become the inspiration of popular music throughout society. When blues singers could be heard in any southern house square on a Saturday afternoon, and the porches of country stores and plantation cabins were alive to the sounds of idly picked guitars, there were few who stopped to consider the nature of the music. Blues singers were part of the total scene, no more to be remarked on than were the mules that drew the wagons to cotton gin, or the watermelons ripening on the vines in the spreading patches. There's a certain appropriateness in this, for it is in the nature of folk music that it is the creation of the people and not separate from the whole fabric of living. Few collectors of folk music who were studying the music of the Negro attempted to note the blues as it appeared. They were far more concerned when they listened and wrote to preserve the musical forms which the blues threatened to displace. Occasional verses and fragments were noted, but generally the collectors looked upon the blues with hostility, regarding it as a degeneration of the folklore they were anxious to save. Their endeavors were worthy, but the lack of any accurate observation of the blues at its inception is irreparable. Neither were there any chroniclers of the blues as the music developed, no chroniclers except the blues singers themselves. It's to the singers that we must turn to for information about the blues today. Today, it's still possible, but only just, to hear the history of the blues from the mouths of many of them who shaped it. But the survivors of the first decades are few. Memories are dimmed by age and scarred by experience. Time and pride have colored some recollections. Distrust and envy may have distorted others. Fingers are no longer nimble when old men are asked to play blues. Blues that were sung in youth may have little meaning when the heat of the moment has been long forgotten. But the problems of piecing together the story of the blues are many. It's a sociological axiom that the observer changes the nature of the subject observed by the very act of observation. It's a sociological axiom that the observer changes the nature of the subject observed by the very act of observation. Not only does his presence change the circumstances that exist when he is not present, but the structure of his own research and the kind of interpretation that he makes from the material he gains may subtly distort the image of the subject. This is a principle which is evident in differing ways in which the blues is seen today. For some people, it is infinitely glamorous. For others, it is a symbol of oppression of a racial minority. For some Negroes today, it is a part of a proud tradition, while for others, it is the last brand of the plantation and humiliating. There are some who view the blues as a music of protest, and some who consider it a music of self-pity. There are those who consider it important primarily as an influence in jazz, and those who use it to inspire their own music making. For each and every category, the significance of the blues is different. And of course, there are those for whom the blues has no significance at all. Seen from any point of view, the blues is both a state of mind and a music which gives voice to it. Blues is the wail of the forsaken, the cry of independence, the passion of the lusty, the anger of the frustrated, and the laughter of the fatalist. It's the agony of indecision, the despair of the jobless, the anguish of the bereaved, and the dry wit of the cynic. As such, the blues is the personal emotion of the individual, finding through music a vehicle for self-expression. But it is also a social music. The blues can be entertainment. It can be music for dancing and drinking, by the music of a class within a segregated group. So, the blues can be a creation of artists within a folk community, whether it's in the deep rural south or in the congested ghettos of the industrial cities. Blues is the song of the casual guitarist on the back stoop, the music of the piano player in the barrel house, the jukebox rhythm and blues hit. It's the ribald dozens of the medicine show, the floor show of the edge of town club, the showbiz of the traveling troupe, and the latest number of a recording star. Blues is all these things and all these people, the creation of renowned and widely recorded artists, and the inspiration of a man known only to his community, perhaps only to himself. So, the story of the blues is the story of humble, obscure, unassuming men and women, and it is the story of some whose names have become household words, in Negro households, that is. For many of them, nothing remains as evidence of their skill except the few brief minutes of a phonograph record or two made 40 years ago. Even some of the most important bluesmen are known only for their records. We may never know the features of Texas Alexander or Pinetop Smith or Robert Johnson. Many of the places where blues worked remain unlisted and undocumented. The shacks and juke joints have been reduced to splinters of dry wood and torn fragments of tar paper fallen to the bulldozer and the wrecking crew. Automobiles stand on the sites of the old TOBA theaters, and the medicine show no longer set up on a vacant lot of southern townships. Yet there are jukes still. The cotton still blooms in July. And it may still be a blues singer who drives the mechanical picker. And there are ghettos still. The kitchenette. Apartments have not ceased to demand exorbitant rents. And it may well be a blues singer who drives the vegetable truck. Blues is music, and blues is song. Blues singers are people. Blues is not text. Blues singers are not pictures. But they aren't discs of shellac or vinyl either. As the disembodied voices that struggle to be heard about the needle scratch of old records may give some impression of the sound of the blues, so this brief outline may place the blues singers in the context of the time and places where they lived and worked and sang and sometimes died. The mind's eye might clothe these instant images of the camera with flesh and blood and animate the figures frozen in southern cotton rows and southside clubs. You won't find all the singers and all the settings here which make up the story of the blues, but perhaps there is sufficient to show the rich variety of forms of the blues, the many personalities who created the music in the past and still do today, and the world of experience which has inspired them. End of introduction. The Story of the Blues by Paul Oliver. A recording for Vox Olympia. The Story of the Blues by Paul Oliver. A recording for Vox Olympia. Copyright Design Yearbook Limited, 1969. Third printing, June 1975. Published in the United States of America by Chilton Book Company, Library of Congress Catalog Card Number 73-76487, ISBN 080195854. Designed by Ian Cameroon and Jacques Solomon. Produced by Design Yearbook Limited, 21 Ivor Place, London, Northwest. Printed in the United States of America. Forward. In 1964, I was invited by Francis Mason, then Cultural Officer of the United States Information Service in London, to prepare an exhibition entitled The Story of the Blues, which was held in September that year at the American Embassy. My own photographs of blues singers and their environment taken during field work, and my collection of documentary photographic material and ephemera formed the basis of the exhibition, which was augmented by the generous loan of illustrative material by collectors in several countries. The exhibition staff prepared and enlarged the pictures for the exhibition, and I am grateful to them for their work and to Mr. Mason for inviting me to organize the show, the results of which form the basis of the present book. Much additional material has been included in the book, and I'm very grateful to Miss Virginia Diker and her staff at the Library of Congress for preparing copies of photographs and the collection of Farm Security Administration, to Terry Franklin at the United States Information Service in London for much help with additional archive material. I owe a special debt of gratitude to Frederick Ramsey Jr. for the loan of many of his photographs taken on field trips in the 50s, including some of which were included in his documentary book, Been Here and Gone, and which comprise an unparalleled archive. I am also indebted to William Russell for the loan of several early photographs taken by him when few people were interested in the blues. George Adens and Jacques Demetre made available valuable photographs from their field trips in 1959 and later. Since 1964, further research in the field and photographic coverage of the blues by a number of enthusiasts has added greatly to our knowledge, with many of the resultant pictures being included here. In Mississippi, one of the most important of blues schools has been carefully documented by David Evans and Marina Bokelman, while in Mississippi and Georgia, George Mitchell has been doing similar work. I am grateful to all of them for their valued help, and likewise for their photographs taken on location and during field trips in the United States, to Mike Leadbitter, Mac McCormick, Harry Oster, Mike Rowe, Chris Stroschwitz, Frank Scott, Peter Welding, and David Wild. Thanks too for their valuable portraits to Richard A. Waterman and Valerie Wilmer. Several of the photographers mentioned above have also loaned documentary pictures and ephemera from their collection, and I wish to express my warm appreciation for their help to Lawrence Cohn, the late George Hofer, John Godrich, Bernard Klatsko, Albert McCarthy, Simon Napier, Lindbergh O'Brien, Duncan Scheidt, Victoria Spivey, John Steiner, and John Bacon. For the loan of many photographs, I am very grateful to Terry Brown of Fontana Vanguard Records, to Fop Sinengay Damsty of Philips Phonograph Fish Industry, Holland, Carl Emil Knudsen of Storyville Records, and Don Schlitten of Prestige Records, for their permission to reproduce illustrations from Folk Beliefs of the Southern Negro by Newbell Niles Pickett, University of North Carolina Press, from Milton Metfessel's Phonophotography in Folk Music, University of North Carolina Press, From Black Chicago by Alan H. Spires, University of Chicago Press. I'm especially grateful to the respective publishers, and likewise my sincere thanks to the editors of Look magazine for permissions to use photographs taken by Bob Leavitt. Nicholas Pearls kindly loaned me many examples of printed ephemera. So did Mac McCormick and Bert Wyatt. My thanks to all of them, and to Ian Barclay, who photographed record labels from items in his collection. Warm thanks too to Richard Allen, Carl Gerd Zur Hyde, John Holt, Bob Groom, Francis Smith, and the late Langston Hughes for their help in various ways. Donald Kincaid undertook the difficult task of transcribing the music examples and generously devoted many hours to the work and musical problems involved. Tony Russell read the manuscript, checked transcriptions, and made many valued suggestions. Miss Jo Reed painstakingly photocopied and processed many of the illustrations. My heartfelt thanks to all of them for their time and trouble. As always, my wife, Valerie, helped me at every stage, from assisting me when photographing in the field to hanging the pictures at the exhibition, and finally the preparation of the book. And I'm immensely grateful to the editorial design staff at Design Yearbook Limited. My special thanks for their care in planning the book and integrating unfamiliar faces and places meticulously into the text. My greatest debt of gratitude, of course, is to the blues singers and musicians themselves, whose creative abilities, born in painful experience, have immeasurably enriched our musical experience. To them, this book is respectfully and thankfully dedicated. Many are still living at the time of writing, but I feel I should point out that by publication, some of my appreciation must regretfully be presented posthumously. Paul Oliver.